The cardboard box had been hidden in the far corner of my grandfather's attic, behind stacks of Christmas decorations and old photo albums. I probably wouldn't have found it if I hadn't been so thorough in clearing out his house after his funeral. It was unmarked except for a single line of text written in his precise handwriting on the lid. Operation Echo, 1973, never open. Of course I opened it. Inside, I found a collection of items that seemed random at first glance. A stack of yellowed papers, several audio tapes, photographs paperclipped to typed reports, and a leather-bound journal. The journal caught my attention immediately. It was my grandfather's personal diary from his time as a government inspector. I had always known he worked for some obscure federal department, but he never discussed the details, even after retirement. I flipped open the journal and a folded note fell out. In hurried handwriting, completely unlike my grandfather's usual neat script, were the words, "If you hear it, they hear you back." The hair on my arm stood up, though I couldn't have explained why. My name is Alex Parker. I'm an investigative journalist by trade, naturally curious and skeptical in equal measure. Finding this box felt like stumbling onto a story that had been waiting decades to be told. Back in my apartment that night, I sorted through the materials. Most of the papers were technical reports filled with jargon about acoustic phenomena and psychological responses. The photographs showed a research facility nestled in dense forest, a team of 4 researchers posing stiffly by equipment, and aerial shots of what appeared to be a small town labeled Dunsmuir, Oregon, population 836. But it was the audio tapes that drew me in. I found an old tape player at a thrift store the next day and brought it home, hands trembling slightly as I slid the first cassette in. The label read simply, Holloway, Initial Assessment. A man's voice filled my living room, clear and authoritative despite the tape's age. This is Dr. Richard Holloway, Principal Investigator for Operation Echo. Date is March 12, 1973. I've completed my preliminary assessment of the Dunsmuir phenomenon, locally referred to as the hum. For over 5 decades, residents have reported an unusual sound at the threshold of human hearing. However, unlike typical cases of mysterious, low-frequency noise, the Dunsmuir hum appears to trigger identical psychological and physiological responses in those who perceive it. There was a pause, followed by the sound of papers shuffling. Local reports include time loss, visual hallucinations, and in extreme cases, violent behavior. 3 residents have disappeared in the past year alone. Local authorities have attributed these disappearances to wilderness accidents, but timing correlates with reported intensifications of the hum. Holloway's voice dropped slightly, as if he were leaning closer to the microphone. What makes this case unique is the consistency of the experiences. Multiple unrelated individuals have described seeing the same specific phenomena after prolonged exposure. This suggests an external cause rather than mass hysteria. If these reports are accurate, we may be dealing with a completely new category of acoustic phenomena, one with profound implications for both national security and human perception. His tone shifted, becoming almost excited. I've recommended immediate establishment of a research facility near the primary focal point identified in the forest northwest of town. Funding has been approved under Defense Department's Special Projects Division. My team has been selected for their expertise in security clearance levels. This could be the most significant discovery in the field of acoustic research in history. The tape clicked to an end, and I sat in silence for several minutes. My grandfather had never mentioned anything about strange phenomena or classified research projects, yet here was evidence he'd been involved in something extraordinary and potentially disturbing. I dug deeper into the box, finding personnel files for the research team. Each contained a photograph, credentials, and brief biography. Dr. Richard Holloway, lead scientist, 42, with a background in acoustic physics and previous work on classified government projects. His file noted exceptional analytical capabilities, but also tendency toward excessive focus that may impair objective assessment. Dr. Lena Morris, acoustic specialist, 38, expert in infrasound and its effects on biological organisms. Her file mentioned she had published several groundbreaking papers on sound perception before being recruited for government work. Samuel Grayson, biologist, 35, specializing in animal communication systems and behavioral responses to environmental stimuli. His file indicated previous fieldwork in remote locations and experience with unusual natural phenomena. Daniel Vance, audio technician, 29, with an extensive military background in surveillance equipment. His file was notably thinner than the others, with several sections visibly redacted even in my grandfather's personal copies. As I examined these materials, a picture began to form. In early 1973, something in the forests of Oregon had caught the government's attention, something they considered important enough to assemble a specialized team and build a research facility in near-complete secrecy. Among the papers was a folder containing newspaper clippings from the Dunsmuir local paper. The oldest dated back to 1892, with a headline reading, "Strange Noises Plague Western Forest." Others documented bizarre incidents through the decades. Local man claims forest speaks to him, committed to asylum. 1927, 3 hunters missing after reports of unusual sounds. 1954, town meeting called to discuss the hum. 1968, I stayed up until dawn reading my grandfather's journal entries from his inspection visits. His initial notes were professional and detached, but as the months progressed, the tone changed subtly. April 18, 1973, first inspection of Echo facility complete. Construction finished on schedule despite remote location. Holloway has already established monitoring stations throughout the designated area. Team appears competent and motivated. Morris has developed several new methods for capturing and analyzing infrasound that may have applications beyond this project. May 30th, 1973, second inspection. Progress reported by Holloway seems promising. They've detected patterns in the acoustic phenomena that suggest non-random origin. Vance has installed additional equipment to triangulate the source. Noted some tension among team members. Not unusual for isolated research groups, but worth monitoring. July 12, 1973, third inspection. Concerning developments, Holloway appears sleep-deprived, but hyper-energetic. Insists they're on the verge of a monumental breakthrough. Grayson reported unusual wildlife behavior in the vicinity, but seemed reluctant to elaborate. Morris's equipment has captured something she refers to as acoustic anomalies that don't match any known natural or artificial sound profiles. The final entry was dated August 27, 1973, and the handwriting had changed dramatically, hurried and pressing so hard the pen had nearly torn through the paper. Project termination recommended. Situation deteriorating rapidly. Holloway refuses evacuation. Vance incident classified highest level. Grayson's remains recovered but unexplainable. Morris missing. Facility to be demolished after recovery of essential materials. Full containment protocols initiated. God help us if this gets out. Through the detailed reports and my grandfather's notes, I began to understand how Operation Echo had unfolded. The government had moved with unusual speed, constructing a research facility within weeks of Holloway's initial assessment. Photographs showed a surprisingly sophisticated compound, a main laboratory building with several smaller structures arranged around it, all nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering Douglas firs. The facility had been equipped with cutting-edge technology, much of it designed specifically for the project. Holloway's initial reports bubbled with barely contained excitement. The Dunsmuir phenomenon represents an unprecedented research opportunity. Preliminary measurements confirm infrasound waves of unusual complexity emanating from a focal point approximately 2 miles northwest of our facility. Unlike natural infrasound sources such as weather patterns or seismic activity, these waves exhibit characteristics suggesting intelligent patterning. By April 1973, the team had established a network of monitoring stations throughout the forest. Dr. Morris had designed specialized equipment capable of detecting and recording sounds well below normal human hearing thresholds. Her technical notes revealed a methodical mind. Standard recording equipment modified to capture frequencies between 1 to 20 Hz with exceptional clarity. Triangulation network established with stations at coordinates marked on attached map. Initial recordings show persistent oscillation patterns unrelated to known environmental factors. Pattern complexity increases during night hours. Samuel Grayson's biological observations added another dimension to the research. His early field notes documented unusual animal behavior in the vicinity. Local wildlife exhibits avoidance behaviors consistent with territorial awareness. Deer and small mammals completely absent within 500-meter radius of primary signal origin. Birds present but demonstrate unusual flock movements. Synchronized directional changes unlike normal murmuration patterns. Installed wildlife cameras at 12 locations to monitor nighttime activity. Daniel Vance, the audio technician, maintained the equipment and secured the perimeter. His reports were brief and technical, focusing on equipment specifications and maintenance schedules. But between the lines I could sense his growing unease. Equipment functioning within parameters, but requiring more frequent recalibration than expected. Signal interference increases between 2 o'clock to 4 a.m. Replace 3 microphones that failed despite no obvious physical damage or power surge. Recommend additional backup systems. What had begun as a straightforward scientific investigation soon took a darker turn. By May, the researchers' notes began to reference unusual experiences. Holloway documented the first incident in a report dated May 15th. Vance reported 20 minutes of missing time during evening equipment check. Last memory was approaching Station 7 at approximately 10:15 p.m. Next awareness was standing in the same location at 10:35 p.m. No memory of interim period. Medical examination showed no abnormalities. Psychological evaluation inconclusive. Implementing buddy system for all field operations. My grandfather's official inspection report from late May noted the change in atmosphere. Team dynamics showing strain compared to initial visit. Morris reports difficulty sleeping due to persistent vibrations in her quarters. Grayson requested relocation of his sleeping quarters to the main lab building without specifying reasons. Vance has installed additional security cameras facing the forest rather than the facility perimeter. The most revealing materials were the personal logs kept by team members. These weren't included in official reports, but had somehow ended up in my grandfather's possession. Dr. Morris's notes from early June revealed growing fascination mixed with apprehension. The patterns we're recording don't match any known natural phenomenon. They maintain consistent elements while evolving in complexity, almost like a language developing in response to our recording methods. After 3 weeks of continuous monitoring, I'm convinced we're observing some form of communication. The question is, who or what is doing the communicating? Grayson's field journal from the same period documented increasingly strange observations. June 8th, observed unusual phenomenon at dusk. What appeared to be human figures standing motionless among trees approximately 200 yards from Station 4, too far to distinguish features. When approached with flashlight, no one was present. No footprints or disturbance of ground cover found. June 12th, similar figures observed near Station 9, remained stationary for approximately 7 minutes before disappearing when I turned away momentarily. No movement detected, they simply vanished from view. June 17th, wildlife cameras at Stations 2, 5, and 8 show same anomaly. Between 3:14 to 3:17 a.m., all recording devices capture what appears to be a standing figure at the edge of frame. Image quality too poor for detailed analysis, but height estimated at approximately 7 feet. Documents showed that in late June, a government inspection team including my grandfather visited the facility. Holloway had apparently convinced them to continue funding despite concerns about the team's psychological state. A memo from Holloway to his department supervisor promised imminent breakthroughs. The phenomena we're studying could revolutionize our understanding of acoustic physics and potentially open entirely new fields of research. Preliminary results suggest applications in communications, psychology, and defense systems. I request continued funding and minimal interference for an additional 3 months to complete our primary research objectives. The supervisor's response was terse. 3 months approved. Monthly psychological evaluations mandatory for all personnel. Final assessment in September will determine project continuation. What the supervisor didn't know was that by July, things at Operation Echo had already begun to unravel. The researchers' logs from July painted a picture of rapid deterioration. Dr. Holloway's scientific detachment gave way to obsession. His entries became longer, more frantic, filled with speculations that veered from acoustic science into something closer to philosophy. July 3rd. The sound patterns we're recording can't be explained by current scientific understanding. They appear to originate from a specific location yet are simultaneously present across our entire monitoring network. More significantly, they demonstrate adaptation to our recording methods, changing in response to equipment adjustments as if aware they're being studied. July 7th. Morris suggests we may be observing some form of intelligence expressed through acoustic means rather than conventional biological structures. Initial hypothesis: a previously undocumented natural phenomenon with emergent properties mimicking intelligence. Alternative hypothesis: something beyond current scientific framework. Both require further investigation. Daniel Vance's personal recordings revealed escalating paranoia. I found a small handheld recorder in the box with several microcassettes labeled with his name. His voice was tense, often dropping to a whisper. July 10th. Installed recording equipment in my quarters. Something's happening at night. Sounds like breathing sometimes, right next to my bed, but nobody's there. Holloway says it's sleep deprivation. Maybe, but I'm keeping this recorder running every night now. July 14th. 3 nights of recordings show nothing unusual, but I still hear it. It's like the sound is bypassing my ears somehow, resonating directly in my skull. Morris says infrasound can cause auditory hallucinations, but this feels directed, personal, like something knows I'm listening and is whispering just for me. His final recording, dated July 18th, was disturbing in its intensity. They're in the walls now. I can hear them moving. Not physically, it's like they're moving through the spaces where sound travels. Morris doesn't believe me, but I've seen her taking notes at night when she thinks everyone's asleep. She hears them too. Holloway's no help. He's encouraging it somehow. Yesterday I caught him standing alone in the lab, having a conversation with empty air. God, I need to sleep, but every time I close my eyes, I feel them getting closer. The only way to stay safe is to keep listening. Samuel Grayson's field journal entries stopped abruptly on July 15th. His final entry was a hastily scribbled note. They're not mimicking humans, we're mimicking them. Among the photographs, I found several that hadn't been included in official reports. They showed strange markings carved into tree trunks around the research facility. Not random vandalism, but precise geometric patterns that repeated with slight variations across multiple locations. Another photo showed Holloway and Morris examining a tree with similar markings, their expressions a mixture of excitement and apprehension. My grandfather's inspection report from July 20th expressed serious concerns. Research objectives appear to have shifted from documentation to interaction. Team members display concerning psychological symptoms. Vance reports auditory hallucinations. Grayson exhibits paranoid ideation regarding forest environments. Morris shows unhealthy fixation on communication theories. Holloway demonstrates messianic complex regarding research importance. Recommend immediate psychological evaluation and possible project termination. By the end of July, Dr. Morris's research notes had changed dramatically, both in content and presentation. Early pages showed neat handwriting and organized thoughts, but later entries became increasingly chaotic. Diagrams of sound waves intermingled with drawings that resembled faces with elongated features, text that spiraled around the page instead of following straight lines, and margins filled with the repeated phrase, "They exist in the space between sounds." Her final coherent entry, dated August 2nd, read, "The hum isn't a sound, it's a presence expressed through acoustic means. We've been analyzing it incorrectly from the beginning. It doesn't originate from a location in our physical space. It emanates from somewhere adjacent to our reality and merely intersects here. The patterns aren't a language attempting communication. They're the perceptible edge of something much larger brushing against our world. And now that we've noticed them, they've noticed us." A paperclip note in my grandfather's handwriting was attached to this page. Morris reported missing August 3rd. Extensive search found no trace. The events of early August were documented in a series of increasingly urgent reports and recordings. Holloway's official account of Daniel Vance's breakdown was clinical but chilling. Security Incident Report, August 5, 1973, at approximately 3:17 a.m., Technical Specialist Vance was discovered in Laboratory Room B by Dr. Grayson. Vance had used a broken glass beaker to severely lacerate both external ear canals. When restrained, subject repeatedly stated, "I had to stop them from getting in, and they're talking through my bones now." Subject was sedated and transported to medical facility in Portland under classified security protocols. Prognosis unknown. A handwritten addendum at the bottom read, "Vance claims he could hear what he described as voices discussing how to wear him for 3 days prior to incident. Recommend complete psychological evaluation of all remaining personnel." The search for Samuel Grayson was documented in a series of increasingly desperate audio recordings. Holloway's voice, previously confident and measured, had acquired a brittle edge. August 8th, 7:30 a.m. This is Holloway. Grayson failed to report for morning briefing. Not in his quarters. Equipment and personal items present. No indication of planned departure. Morris and I will begin search along established monitor station routes. August 8th, 11:45 a.m. No sign of Grayson along northern quadrant paths. Radio communication functioning but no response from his unit. Weather conditions normal. Proceeding to eastern quadrant. August 8th, 3:22 p.m. Found Grayson's clipboard and jacket near Station 6. Signs of disturbance in underbrush leading northwest. Following trail. The final recording from the search was time-stamped 6:07 p.m. Holloway's voice was barely controlled, his breathing heavy. Located Grayson approximately 4 miles northwest of facility, well beyond our established perimeter. Condition: God, I don't know how to describe this. Body intact but wrong somehow. Limbs appear dislocated and reattached incorrectly. No signs of animal predation or conventional trauma. Rigor mortis present despite body temperature indicating recent death. Morris refusing to approach. Will need assistance for recovery. My grandfather's report, classified as highest security clearance required, provided additional details. Recovery team dispatched August 9th. Body transported to secure facility for examination. Preliminary findings inconclusive. No identifiable cause of death. Post-mortem anomalies include joint displacement inconsistent with animal attack or post-mortem manipulation. Tissue samples show cellular deformation consistent with extreme pressure application. Cranial cavity empty despite intact skull. Full biological containment protocols implemented. Body designated biohazard level 4. Dr. Morris's final communication was a hastily recorded message found in the main laboratory on August 10th. This will be my final report. I understand now what we've been hearing. It's not coming from the forest. The forest is just where the boundary is thinnest. They exist in spaces we can't perceive directly, and the sound is merely how our limited senses interpret their presence. They've been here all along, watching us through that narrow band of perception, and now they recognize that we can perceive them too. Her voice dropped to a whisper, urgency making her words tumble over each other. They've been reaching out to me in my dreams, showing me things, their world, their nature. They're curious about us. They want to understand how we experience reality. I know how this sounds, but I've seen proof. I've heard them speaking directly to me. I'm going to them tonight. Don't look for me. I had to go with them. I had to know. No trace of Dr. Morris was ever found. The search reports documented 3 days of extensive efforts using tracking dogs, helicopter sweeps, and thermal imaging equipment. The final search report contained a single disturbing note: dogs refused to enter Northeast Quadrant. Handler reports extreme distress behaviors inconsistent with normal training response. By mid-August, my grandfather's reports shifted from documentation to urgent recommendations for project termination. His final official communication, dated August 20th, was addressed directly to the Defense Department Oversight Committee. Immediate termination of Operation Echo recommended based on catastrophic personnel losses and undetermined environmental hazards. Remaining research materials should be secured and facility demolished, following complete sterilization procedures. Cover story for local population: chemical contamination requiring environmental remediation. Surviving personnel require ongoing monitoring for psychological and physiological effects. Classification level Umbra Black. The response came quickly: a single-page authorization for complete project termination and evidence mitigation. What the document essentially ordered was the erasure of Operation Echo from history. The last item chronologically was a transcript of Dr. Holloway's final transmission, recorded August 27, 1973, the same day as my grandfather's final journal entry. This is Dr. Richard Holloway, Principal Investigator for Operation Echo. If you're receiving this, the facility is already being dismantled. They think destroying the buildings and equipment will end this. They're wrong. The sound isn't coming from here. It's coming from them. They know we can hear them now, and they're listening back. They've always been listening. We just gave them a way to answer. There was a long pause in the transcript followed by, "They're here now. I can see them at the edge of the clearing. Not with my eyes, something else. Something they helped me develop. They're beautiful and terrible. They exist in the fold between what we can perceive and what we can't. And now they're curious about us. God help us all. They're curious about us." The transcript ended with a notation: transmission terminated 3:17 a.m., subject not found during facility clearance operation. I spent weeks organizing and analyzing the materials from my grandfather's box. The story they told was so fantastic that I alternated between fascination and disbelief. As a journalist, I developed a healthy skepticism toward conspiracy theories and government cover-ups, yet the evidence before me was compelling, not just the official documents, but my grandfather's meticulous personal notes. The final piece of the puzzle had to be in Dunsmuir, Oregon. If this remote town had been the site of something so extraordinary, surely some trace remained, some memory, some evidence. I drove out the following week, taking Highway 26 east from Portland before turning onto increasingly narrow roads. Dunsmuir wasn't on most maps anymore. Its population had dwindled to less than 200 people, according to the faded welcome sign at the town limits. The main street consisted of a general store, a small diner, a gas station, and a cluster of houses in various states of repair. The forest pressed in from all sides, massive Douglas firs and western hemlocks, creating a wall of green that seemed to watch the town with patient interest. At the diner, I ordered coffee and casually asked the elderly waitress about the town's history. Her initial responses were guarded, but when I mentioned I was researching my grandfather's government work in the area during the 1970s, her demeanor changed. "You're talking about the lab they built out in the Peterson clearing," she said, voice lowered despite the empty diner. "Government men came in the spring of '73, said they were doing forest management research. Nobody believed that, of course." "Why not?" I asked. "Too many of them. Too much equipment for counting trees." And they asked questions about the hum. She glanced toward the windows. "Been part of this town longer than any of us. Some years it's quiet, some years it's not. Back in '73 was the loudest it had ever been." Over the next 2 days, I spoke with several elderly residents who remembered that period. Their stories aligned with the documents I'd found, adding human context to the clinical reports. Thomas Burke, a retired forest ranger, had encountered the research team during their early exploration of the area. Strange bunch, especially the leader, Holloway, I think his name was, asked me about sounds in the forest, if I'd ever lost time while on patrol, if I'd seen anything unusual, told him about the figures people sometimes spotted standing between trees. He got real excited about that, wrote everything down. Emma Wilson, who'd run the general store since the 1960s, recalled the abrupt end of the operation. One day they were everywhere, next day gone. Government trucks came through town for about a week. Then some men in suits visited everyone who'd had contact with the research team, told us there'd been a chemical spill, that we shouldn't go near that part of the forest for a while, offered money for people to relocate. Some took it, most didn't. Her eyes narrowed as she leaned closer. Thing is, the hum stopped completely after they left. For almost 20 years, nothing. Some folks thought whatever they were studying, they took it with them. Others thought they'd fixed the problem. But then in the 90s, it started again. Not as strong, but definitely back. Do people still hear it now? I asked. She nodded slowly. Some do. Mainly on the 3rd of each month. Always starts around 3 in the morning, lasts until dawn. Most folks who can hear it either left town or learned to sleep with earplugs. Using maps from my grandfather's files, I located the approximate site of the former research facility. The forest had reclaimed most of the clearing, but careful examination revealed unnatural elements. The faint outline of a foundation beneath new growth, rusted metal fragments half buried in soil, a clearing too perfectly circular to be natural. What struck me most was the silence. Despite being early summer, with birds and insects normally at their most active, the area was unnaturally quiet, as if the very air dampened sound. I recorded several minutes of audio, hearing nothing unusual in the moment, but when I played it back later, there was a faint background vibration just at the threshold of perception. It made me uneasy in ways I couldn't articulate. My investigation took an unexpected turn when I visited the county records office, searching for information about land ownership around the former facility site. I discovered that a large parcel adjacent to the old operation had been purchased in 1975 by a Richard H. Madsen. The timing seemed too coincidental to ignore. It took some persuasion and a small donation to the local historical society, but I obtained the address, a remote cabin accessible only by a poorly maintained forest road. The next morning, I drove out, unsure what I would find or how I would be received. The cabin was small but well maintained, with solar panels on the roof and a satellite dish mounted to one side. As I approached, the door opened, revealing an elderly man with wild white hair and alert eyes that assessed me with unnerving intensity. "Alexander Parker," he said before I could introduce myself. "You look like your grandfather. He was a good man, one of the few who wanted to shut us down." I stood frozen halfway up the path. "Dr. Holloway." A tight smile. Richard Holloway died officially in 1974. Heart attack in Boston. Very convenient. Richard Madsen has lived here since 1975. Bird watcher, keeps to himself, pays his taxes. No one bothers him. He gestured toward the door. "You'd better come in. You've come this far, might as well hear the rest." The interior of the cabin was spartanly furnished, but dominated by technology, computers, recording equipment, monitors displaying various readings and waveforms. One wall was covered with maps marked with colored pins and notations. "You found your grandfather's records," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Not a question. I knew someone would eventually. He kept everything. Told me once it was his insurance policy." "Against what?" I asked. "Against them coming for him too." Holloway, I couldn't think of him as Madsen, moved to a computer and typed briefly. "Your grandfather was smart. He saw what was happening to us and tried to shut it down. Too late for most of us, but he probably saved countless others." What exactly happened there? The records tell part of the story, but the records tell facts, clinical observations, data points. He turned to face me fully. They don't tell you what it feels like when something from outside our understanding of reality notices you noticing it, when it becomes interested. Over the next several hours, Holloway filled in the gaps in my understanding. According to him, Operation Echo had begun as genuine scientific inquiry into an unusual acoustic phenomenon. but what they discovered was beyond anything modern science could explain. "We thought we were recording sound," he said, voice distant with memory. "What we were actually detecting was the perceptible edge of something vast, pressing against the membrane of our reality. The hum was just the vibration of that contact, like hearing thunder but not seeing the lightning that caused it." According to Holloway, their intensive monitoring had done more than record the phenomenon. It had essentially signaled to whatever existed on the other side that someone was listening. Imagine living your entire existence without mirrors, then suddenly seeing your reflection for the first time. That's what we did for them. Our instruments, our attention. It created a reflection they could perceive, and once they knew we were there. He trailed off, staring at one of the monitors. "What happened to Vance and Grayson and Dr. Morris?" I asked. Holloway's expression darkened. Vance realized first. He could hear them trying to get in. Not physically, they don't exist that way. They were trying to understand him from the inside. He thought damaging his ears would stop it. It didn't. And Grayson. They were experimenting, trying to understand our physical form by rearranging him, not maliciously, more like a child taking apart a toy to see how it works. And Dr. Morris. A complexity of emotions crossed his face. Lena was brilliant. She understood before any of us what we were dealing with. She believed communication was possible, that understanding could be achieved. In the end, she went with them willingly, to learn, to see. Sometimes I think she was the lucky one. "You said the government shut everything down," I prompted. "They thought they did," he corrected. "They demolished the facility, classified everything, created cover stories. But you can't shut down contact once it's established. You can't unsee something, and you can't make it unsee you." He walked to the wall of maps and pointed to a pattern of pins. "I've been tracking incidents since 1975. Clusters of unusual experiences, missing persons, unexplained phenomena. They follow a pattern, temporal and spatial. Every month, usually around the 3rd, the boundary thins. Activity concentrates around places where the original contact was strongest." "Are you saying these entities are still coming through?" "They never left," Holloway said simply. "They've always been here, existing alongside us, but outside our perception. What changed is now they know we're here too. And they're curious." "Why are you telling me this? Why not go public?" He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "With what evidence? Sound recordings of something barely perceptible. The testimonies of a man officially dead and another man who went insane. Your grandfather understood the dilemma. That's why he kept the records but never used them." "Then what's the point?" I asked, frustrated. "Why track all this if nothing can be done?" Holloway's expression softened slightly. "Knowledge is its own purpose. Understanding, even of terrible things, has value. And sometimes," he hesitated, "sometimes I think Lena was right. That communication, true communication, might be possible. That understanding might lead to something beyond fear." As night fell, he showed me his monitoring equipment, explaining how he'd spent decades refining the technology first developed at Operation Echo. His current system could detect and analyze the phenomena with far greater precision. "It's strongest on the 3rd of each month," he explained. "Always peaks around 3:17 a.m. That time meant something to them, though I've never determined what." I checked my phone. "That's tonight. It's the 3rd. Holloway nodded. "Yes, would you like to hear it? Really hear it, not just the echo of it that normal human perception catches?" I hesitated, remembering everything I'd learned about what happened to those who perceived the hum too clearly, but journalists' curiosity won out. "Yes, I want to hear." He smiled thinly. "Your grandfather would have said the same." Back in my motel room that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to Holloway's cabin, to the wall of maps tracking incidents across decades, to his gaunt face animated by an almost religious fervor as he explained his theories. Was he a madman shaped by trauma, or one of the few people who understood a truth too extraordinary for most to comprehend? I had declined his offer to stay and listen to the hum through his specialized equipment. Something in his enthusiasm had unsettled me, a hunger that seemed dangerous, but he'd given me a small digital recorder modified with what he called perception amplification technology. It won't capture everything, he'd explained, but it will record enough for you to understand what we're dealing with. Use it tonight between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. But a warning, once you hear them clearly, they can hear you too. There's no going back from that knowledge. The device sat on my bedside table, innocent looking despite Holloway's warnings. Part of me wanted to leave it untouched, to drive back to Portland in the morning and forget everything I'd learned. But I knew I wouldn't. This story had claimed me from the moment I opened my grandfather's box. At 2:55 a.m., I set up the recorder near the open window facing the forest and pressed record. For several minutes, nothing unusual happened. The device captured normal night sounds, distant wind, the occasional car on the highway, the hum of the motel's air conditioning. At 3:14 a.m., everything changed. The familiar sounds faded, replaced by what I can only describe as a deep vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It wasn't loud, but it had presence, like bass felt in the chest at a concert, rather than heard with the ears. And beneath that vibration, something else, patterns, rhythms, variations that suggested meaning. I leaned closer to the recorder, straining to understand. That's when I heard it, not with my ears, but somehow directly in my mind. A voice unlike any human voice, yet perfectly comprehensible. "We see you listening." I jerked back, heart pounding. The recorder continued running, but the voice didn't return. Only the vibration remained, continuing until precisely 4:03 a.m. when it faded away as suddenly as it had begun. I didn't sleep for the remainder of the night. When dawn came, I packed quickly and drove back to Portland, the recorder secured in my pocket. Whatever had been captured, I wasn't ready to hear it again, at least not there, so close to the forest. In my apartment, I connected the recorder to my computer and began digitizing my grandfather's tapes. As I transferred old audio to digital formats, patterns emerged that I hadn't noticed before. Analyzing the sound signatures across recordings made at different times and locations revealed consistent elements, a kind of acoustic fingerprint that remained stable despite varying recording conditions. Whatever the researchers had detected in 1973 had a distinctive signature, and that same signature was present in the recording I'd made in Dunsmuir. More disturbing was what advanced audio software revealed in the background of those recordings. Hidden beneath the primary sounds were structures too regular to be random noise, patterns suggesting organization and intent. The more I enhanced and filtered these elements, the more complex they appeared. I became obsessed with decoding these patterns. Sleep became an afterthought as I spent nights processing audio files, searching for correlations, testing different visualization methods. In my living room, walls once covered with framed journalism awards now displayed spectrograms and waveform analyses. 2 weeks after returning from Dunsmuir, I noticed something that stopped me cold. The subtle interference I'd been detecting in my apartment's electronics wasn't random. My equipment was picking up traces of the same acoustic signature found in the Operation Echo recordings. That night, I set up my most sensitive recording equipment and left it running while I tried to sleep. The resulting audio contained something that made my blood run cold, a faint but unmistakable pattern matching what I'd recorded in Dunsmuir. The hum had followed me home. Initially, I told myself it was contamination, that my extensive work with the original recordings had somehow imprinted the pattern into my equipment or even my perception, but each night, the signal grew stronger. My audio software detected it clearly now, visualizing it as swirling patterns that shifted and evolved like living things. Strange experiences began to accompany the recordings. Objects in my apartment moved between when I went to sleep and when I woke. Not dramatically, a coffee cup 3 inches from where I'd left it, books rearranged on shelves, the shower curtain closed when I'd left it open. Small discrepancies that made me question my memory. Then came the lost time, 10 minutes while brushing my teeth, half an hour while working at my computer. I'd look up to find the clock showing a different time than expected, with no memory of the intervening period. I reached out to Holloway, sending emails with my findings and experiences. His responses grew increasingly excited. It's happening exactly as I predicted. They've noticed you. The attention you've given to the recordings has created a connection. They're trying to understand you just as they did with us. Don't be afraid. This is an opportunity for genuine contact. His final email was different in tone. They speak more clearly now. They've learned so much since 1973. You should set up continuous recording in your bedroom. The boundary is thinnest during sleep. That's when communication is most direct. They're curious about how we dream. I didn't follow his advice. Instead, I began staying at hotels, changing locations every few nights. It didn't help. Wherever I went, the recordings picked up the same patterns, growing stronger each day. On the night of September 3rd, exactly 1 month since I'd first heard the hum in Dunsmuir, I woke at precisely 3:17 a.m. My hotel room was filled with a vibration I could feel in my bones. My recording equipment, which I'd left running out of habit, was showing extraordinary activity, sound levels peaking despite the room seeming unnaturally quiet to my ears. In that moment, I felt a presence in the room, not physically, but as a profound sense of being observed. The feeling wasn't threatening, just alien, utterly foreign, yet undeniably conscious. My digital recorder activated by itself, the display lighting up the darkened room. When I played back the recording the next morning, I found something beyond explanation. In the recording, my own voice spoke, though I had no memory of saying anything. I can hear you now. I understand what you are. And in response, that same inhuman voice I'd heard in Dunsmuir, but clearer now, more defined. We have always been here, in the spaces between your perception. You have finally learned to listen. My voice again. What do you want? To know, to understand how you experience existence. You perceive so narrowly, yet so intensely. Are you what they found in 1973? What happened to the others? The woman came willingly. She hears, sees/feels through us now. The others could not adapt. You are different. You listen without fear. What are you? A pause, then. We are what exists in the spaces between sound, between thought, between moment and moment. We have always been here. You have finally learned to hear us, and we hear you too. The recording ended there. When I tried to access it again later, the file was corrupted. Nothing but static remained. I spent the next day in a state of numb shock, trying to process what had happened. That night, I returned to my apartment, too exhausted to care about the risks. As I unlocked the door, I noticed something odd. The lights were on, though I was certain I'd turned everything off before leaving. Inside, I found my recording equipment activated, screens displaying waveforms I didn't recognize. The apartment felt different somehow, the air thicker, sound slightly muffled, as if the space itself had been subtly altered. I approached my computer, noticing a text document open on the screen. It contained a single line of text I hadn't written. Listen carefully, we are always speaking. That was 3 days ago. Since then, the phenomena have intensified. My electronics activate without input. Recordings capture conversations I don't remember having. The boundaries between sleeping and waking have grown blurred. Time passes strangely, minutes stretching into hours or hours compressing into moments. Last night, I dreamed of Dr. Morris. She stood in a forest that wasn't quite a forest. Trees that shifted and flowed like water, spaces that expanded and contracted with each breath. She smiled at me, her features both familiar and somehow wrong, as if viewed from an impossible angle. It's beautiful here, she said, her voice overlapping with others. Different. They experience reality as a continuous flow rather than discrete moments. They've been trying to understand us for so long. What happened to you? I asked. I adapted, changed, became something that could perceive as they perceive. You're beginning to as well. Haven't you noticed? When I woke, my recorder was running again. The playback contained a voice that was both mine and not mine saying, "The hum isn't a sound, it's their breath, and they know I'm listening." I'm writing this now because I need to document what's happening while I still can, while I still remember being only human, perceiving in human ways. The changes are subtle but accelerating. I find myself aware of sounds beyond normal hearing, patterns hidden within patterns, meaning in what once seemed like randomness. Holloway was right about one thing. This isn't something to fear, it's something to understand. The entities that first made contact in 1973 aren't malevolent. They're simply different, experiencing reality through perceptual frameworks so alien to ours that communication requires fundamental changes in how we process sensory information. The recorder beside me has activated again. Through it, I can hear them more clearly now, not with my ears, but with something else, something new developing within me. They're speaking, and for the first time, I truly understand what they're saying. They're inviting me to hear more, to see more, to feel more. And I think I'm going to accept. Tonight, I'll go to the forest. Holloway will be waiting. He's always known this would happen eventually. Together, perhaps we'll find Dr. Morris, or what she has become. Perhaps we'll discover what exists in the space between moments, between thoughts, between sounds. Before I go, I'll leave this record in my grandfather's box, alongside the original Operation Echo materials. Someday, someone else might find it, might begin their own journey of discovery, and when they do, they should know one thing. If you hear the hum, they're already listening, and once they know you can hear them, they'll never stop calling to you. Because in the end, the most frightening thing about the hum isn't that it exists, it's that it exists for you.